Central bank digital currencies, a government bureaucrat's wet dream, and they will use it to control you. The writing is absolutely on the wall. Let this be a warning. Check out this tweet thread by, oh man, don't laugh at me. Sung Ping An. Okay. How she
nailed it. Great pronunciation.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Really practicing my Chinese these days. How Xi Jinping and CCP with less than 100 million members can control more than 1.3 billion Chinese people. The answer is world first QR code health passport. Xi put an electronic monitoring noose around people's necks since February 2020. You're under 24-hour surveillance. And mind you, right, what we covered about a week ago, how depending on what your QR code was, you were cut off from your money. How freaking crazy is that? So this is the green QR code, meaning you're a good citizen. This is the yellow, meaning you got to get your social credit score points up. And this is the red, meaning you're banned from society. Look, and it's not a joke. Look, there's literally a guard, and he's scanning your QR code, saying, "Oh, you could pass, you can't pass," right? And to get even more dystopian, that's right, that is a fucking drone flying through traffic telling you to behave. This is the future that beholds you with CBDCs. But there is some hope, and the reason that I wanted to cover this today is because this came out today on Finbold and other news outlets. Chinese messaging app WeChat bans accounts involved in Bitcoin and shitcoins. After the widely publicized crackdown by the Chinese government on anything that has to do with cryptocurrency, one of China's most popular instant messaging and calling platforms, WeChat, has banned crypto-related accounts on its platforms. Now, why would they do that? Well, in developing countries, they don't have the luxuries that we have, where they have developed rails, they have exchanges, they have all that stuff. What you hear in developing countries in Nigeria, Venezuela, you have literally WhatsApp groups, and that's how people trade Bitcoin. It's pure peer-to-peer, right? But in China, there's the Great Firewall of China. They don't have American platforms. They don't have WhatsApp. Their equivalent of WhatsApp is WeChat, right? So clearly, right, this tells me that even after the ban, right, people in China are still using Bitcoin peer-to-peer, right? And then connect this with the estimation of the hash rate, that it's estimated around 10% of the hash rate is still located in China. And connect this with the argument that I've been trying to make the last couple of weeks, that incentives are much stronger than coercion, right? Think about it. What would you rather choose? A money that literally gets to decide you can't use this because your QR code is red, not to mention it being inflationary? Or would you rather use freedom money, right? Obviously, people are going to flock towards the freedom money. In China, I think they're going to be pretty successful with this, though, because of the Great Firewall, right? So unless you're tech savvy and you know how to use a VPN and to download, other messaging apps, if you're stuck within, the Chinese ecosystem, you're totally screwed. So, Odell, do you see this as the future in the West, as these nation states try to maintain their holds on their citizens? Where I'm going with this is perhaps mandating KYC wallets on an app store, right? There's a lot of things that people don't talk about, right? The Apple ecosystem is totally gated, right? It only takes, a law to pass, right? Love democracy. To say, hey, you can't download certain Bitcoin software unless we know who you are. So anyways, I think it's an interesting topic. What are your thoughts, Odell?
Well, a couple of key things here. First of all, I don't know if you guys saw the story, I think it was late last week, that there was a bunch of protesters in China that were protesting against banks seizing other people's money and stopping them from doing it with that app that stops your movement with the red code. I don't know if you saw when you pulled it up, even the yellow code stops your movement, but red stops everything. You can't withdraw money, including, and they just looked up all the protesters and they just turned all their codes red. So I think it's a very clear example that if you don't have privacy, you can't have freedom. It's a prerequisite, because you can just get targeted and you can get attacked by external means. I think second of all, you actually don't need a law to be passed for Apple and Google to change their app store policies. Like, a very little pressure could probably get them to do that. And also, Apple has been very aggressive in terms of targeting Bitcoin, including open source wallets and projects, because they're not getting a cut. They like if there's any microtransactions or anything in an app, Apple expects to get 30%, and they're not set up to get 30% of Bitcoin transactions. And also, a lot of the app developers don't want to give them 30% of the Bitcoin transactions. So there's already like an active back and forth there. I know like Sphinx Chat, for instance, got pulled from the App Store for that reason, is my understanding. And it has happened to other apps as well, other Bitcoin apps. The third thing is, I think we're going to see more of this. I think we're going to see increasing draconian surveillance policies across the world. I will say that the positive side is, you mentioned it's hard for people to figure out how to get around the Great Firewall. I think as people have this need, as people have this pain, people will seek it out, and they'll seek out tools and alternatives and education on how to do this stuff. The important thing is that we have the tools, we have the education available for them when they realize the need. The unfortunate reality is most will not come to that conclusion right away. It'll take a while. I mean, I see most of the West just going along with funnies. Bitcoiners talk a big game about CBDCs, and everyone's swiping their credit card and paying with Venmo and Cash App, including the Bitcoiners. So if you give someone a convenient way to send money with quote unquote no fees, and maybe even add a nice little UBI carrot on top of it, and you just automatically deposit money into that wallet every fucking week or whatever, the overwhelming majority, at least in America, the overwhelming majority of Americans are going to use that fucking wallet. So I don't think I think Bitcoiners are a little bit cocky about that, but the important thing here is that Bitcoin provides an option for those who realize the need and want to opt out of that. So it's multi-pronged, right? I think, and I also think Bitcoin can be used as surveillance cuck money, or it can be used as freedom money. The question is, how does the user want to use it? It's an open protocol. That's up to the individual user. And many will choose, the permissioned censorship, pro-censorship, surveillance use of Bitcoin. And that's fine. If they want to do that, so be it. And hopefully more and more will choose to actually use it in a private and sovereign way because they're capable of doing it, and they realize the need and seek it out.
Phil, what are your thoughts on this, man?
Yeah,
scary stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I think Matt makes an excellent point, right? That it is up to the user. This is why we say that it all has to do with, what you're comfortable with and what you're capable of doing and what you're able to do. Because believe it or not, there are some people, there are some people that just, I wouldn't even say it has to do with ability, but they just don't realize that it can be made more private, right? And that can be done without having to go and use some type of a shitcoin. But anyways, we're gonna go back to talking about the Chinese, right? And that green, yellow, red type of whole scenario. I think everybody needs to see the movie Logan's Run from the 1970s. Of course, in their case, the green, yellow, and red has to do with the stages of life. And then once your thing starts to flash red, you quote unquote renew, but really all that happens is that you die. It's kind of creepy, kind of scary that the Chinese have chosen to use this type of system. And it does seem that it is kind of fitting, right? Because if you are flagged as red, you technically have socially died. In a way, you've been cut off access from the resources, from the system. So in a way, you are effectively dead. So that is kind of scary. And I think that, this is what we were talking about yesterday, right? The East versus the decentralized West. I mean, this is scary stuff. They're enacting it. And we're seeing it play in real time. And I think to Matt's point, that is true, right? About not just Bitcoiners, but just average everyday people, right? If you give them an easy way to do something and you give them a nice little UI and you drop them some fake money, right? It doesn't make a difference as long as they can use it for all their debts. At the end of the day, everyone's going to sit there and use it. So it's frightening, but unfortunately, we are all humans and not everybody sees self-sovereignty and privacy in the same, in the same way that we do, and they don't all see the same urgency that we see.
Phil, I think that's really well said. There's a key thing here that is interesting to me. To me, the biggest concern is like the slow frog boiling, right? Like, that meme, like the frog is boiling, but it's happening over time. So he doesn't realize he's boiling until it's too late. In these situations, like with the Chinese health code, it can be very effective at having people realize the need. It'll be very painful, right? But if you get completely cut off of your bank account, if you're not allowed to take public transportation, all of a sudden you're like, okay, digital privacy fucking matters. Like there's no education hurdle that has to happen there. there. When you work in the education space, when you try and help people understand that they need to try and figure out ways to use technology more privately, including Bitcoin, there's this hurdle that first comes with, okay, let me educate you on the concerns that are happening. What are the risks that are happening? And if those risks aren't very apparent, then you have this education hurdle to start with. But if that lever gets turned fully, then you skip that whole education element. So for instance, when I'm talking to Argentinians, right, you don't have to explain to them the risks of bad government money. Like, they've lived through that multiple times, right? You just skip that whole step. They're like, okay, what's the alternative? Like, I need an alternative. For years, we've been talking about not your keys, not your coins. How many people ignored that until they couldn't withdraw from Celsius? And now they're never going to fucking forget that lesson. Like, you don't have to do that part of the education setup. They already realized that. They're like, fuck, okay, I feel that. But the problem is, when you see it happening ahead of time and you see the slow boil, you're like, fuck, they're either going to figure it out or they're going to painfully learn a lesson. And it sucks to see people painfully learn those lessons.
Yeah,
It's so true.
But it's what you said, right? It's the lesson that you only learned once, but by the time you learn it, it might be a little bit too late. Go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to say, going back to what I said before, and people just don't feel that urgency until it happens to them, Like, yeah. I can say for me, like, I didn't feel that urgency until it happened to me, even though I had been reading everything and I had been like, learning, it didn't matter, because at the end of the day, I was like, well, it's fine, because I'm being safe, I'm being secure. And then all of a sudden, you get wrecked in some way and you're like, okay, you know what? I need to rethink this. And obviously I need to take this more seriously.
Yep. But that's why, like, I would say, like, what's happening in the West right now is it could be considered more dangerous. Like, how many people actually feel when they swipe their credit card or they tap their credit card that is being shared with 35 different companies and is being stored insecurely, it's being sold, and it's just being used against them all the time. Like, most people do not realize that. You try and explain that risk to people, they're like, it's no big deal. But if people try and make a purchase and it's like, that purchase is denied, or now you can't have healthcare or something because you made a purchase, then all of a sudden it's immediately apparent to them. So there's a danger here on particularly in America that I've noticed, which is just this constant creep. It's just this slow creep. And people just, the KYC thing in Bitcoin is a perfect example. Like, in 2016, none of the Bitcoin services required KYC. Pretty much none of them required it. That identifying information you have to provide. But over time, slowly and steadily, they added it to as many things as possible. And now at this point, everyone's just like, oh, well, that's normal. But if they had just turned the dial, one day and just every single service required you to do a 3D selfie scan and like give a blood sample to withdraw your Bitcoin, people would have fucking flipped shits.
It's the slow crawl, right? And I agree. I think that what I've noticed is that people are so comfortable with the ease of use of a lot of these services that they don't realize what it is you're giving in return, and they don't realize how vulnerable they are to just government coercion, man. All it takes is just one. You saw it in Canada. It's not even speculation anymore. It wasn't even a law that was passed. It was like it was
exactly.
It was retroactive. When people were donating to the trucker stuff, it wasn't illegal. They decided that it was legal after the fact, and then they went back in time and said you shouldn't have done that. Like, it's I don't even know what to say, but I agree. Phil, you want to chime in?
I just wanted to say that essentially what it is it, this counterparty offers us essentially a reduction of friction at the cost of our privacy and at the cost of our data. And we don't, it's really sad, but I remember getting, I remember the internet, right? Like when it was like in the early 90s and in the mid 90s, and like you didn't care. You would give away all this data. Like none of it mattered, right? You just wanted to get on. You just wanted to see what was happening. You just wanted to, be connected and all this stuff. And it became this whole thing where it essentially, these businesses, right? They kind of took it for granted that all of our data was out there. And now we've taken it for granted that all of our data is out there. And everyone's just like, yeah, well, my data's out there anyways. It's like, well, we need to realize what the implications of that is. Sorry, Matt.
No. I mean, I was kind of cutting you off, but I think like you hit a very interesting cautionary tale that I like to talk about, which is the development of the internet. internet. People today can use email privately, but the overwhelming majority of people have traded convenience and just use Gmail. They literally, the deal of Gmail is that they scan all your fucking email and they sell your data. Like that is literally what they do. And it is the number one email service, right? How many people are using email in a private sovereign way? So I think, especially in terms of supporting Bitcoin projects and people building Bitcoin projects, there needs to be a strong focus. And I think there is, especially more than before, a strong focus on things that are private, that are sovereign, but are still very convenient. They might not be the most convenient thing. You still might be using something that is because there's always a trade-off. It's pretty much always a trade-off between convenience and privacy and security. But if we can make it as convenient as possible, then that hurdle gets broken. And I think with email, you're kind of starting to see it now with things like Proton Mail and Tutanota, where for like the first time you can use email in a relatively private way that's also convenient. But the hope is like Gmail got a lot of users before Proton and Tutanota came out, right? Like we need that in Bitcoin before the adoption curve hits off, before we onboard the next 1 billion people. Let's have a private and sovereign convenient option for them so that some of them will onboard that way.
Absolutely.